All right, well, welcome everybody. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be joining us from. We're excited to have you here. We're also very thankful to Technion for hosting these webinars. Technion is a gold partner of Tableau and has other partnerships as well with other tools and platforms, all of which we as consultants at Technion use to help our clients see and understand their data and make key decisions. We love working with our clients. If you ever have any data needs, feel free to reach out to Technion. They'd love to help you. We'd love to work with you. So I am Joshua Milligan, and I am joined by Bridget Cogley. We are both Technion consultants as well as Tableau Zen Masters. And we're excited today to talk to you about Tableau tips and tricks. And we'll get to that in a moment. But first, just a little bit of housekeeping. If I can get the PowerPoint to cooperate. There we go. So there is a place for you to enter questions, and we can work to get you some answers. So look for that panel on your GoToWebinar controls. Just type in your questions. Even as we go, we'll probably get to most of them at the end, but definitely get them in there as you think of them, and we'll do our best to answer them either as part of this webinar or sometimes offline if needed. Additionally, there will be a recording of this webinar. I just checked, and it is recording. So if everything goes well, it will be available in the next couple of days. There's the URL. You should receive an email that will let you know when it's ready. But if not, feel free just to check that site and enjoy recordings of previous webinars until this one is available. Also, both Bridget and I have our own blogs, so feel free to check those out. Some of the tips and tricks that we're going to share today may have blog posts, some may yet have posts in the future, and some of them you may pick up here and wow your friends because maybe we've never shared it before, who knows, but we're excited to do it. So Tableau tips and tricks. We'll be sharing quite a few. This is round 2, so we did a tips and tricks before, and as I looked at the list of things that we could potentially share, I'm assuming there may be a round 3 in the future. So these are some of the things that we may be able to share today. I don't know that we're going to get to all of them, but we're hoping that within these categories we'll be able to show a few tips and tricks that will make your life easier, or just give you some tools to wow your friends and just do some exciting things with Tableau, as well as Tableau Prep. We may take a look at that today. So to kick us off, I've got Bridget Cogley, and she's going to show us an example where she'll show a lot of tips and tricks along the way. Bridget, thank you.
Well, thank you, Joshua. So I'll go ahead and take this presenter. And so I want to first start off kind of showing something that's pre-built, but then I will also go through and do kind of a live build. So a few things I want to talk about is when I get a data source, one of the things I like to do is to create folders. And so typically when you get a data source, they're usually by data source order. And what I usually do is I try to switch it over to group by folder. So this is the standard view, and then what I typically do is do group by folder, which allows me to organize some of my fields into different and more meaningful ways. So for example, one of the things is I have a set of punches, and so that way I can very easily find these punches without having to look around. So that's kind of my first tip. My other tip has to do with color, and color is one of those tricky things that we often hear is a struggle. And people, one of the things I always get asked is, how do you pick your colors? And so, for example, in this dashboard, I've played with color yet again. I've got a brown background. I've got this yellow, really trying to highlight things that are bad. And then I've got this purple. One of the things that you'll notice that the purple is a lighter tone than the yellow, and that is very intentional. And so one of my other tips that you're more than welcome to steal is that I've got this tool called Paluton. And Paluton allows you to enter a value. So here I've entered the value for the yellow. And what it tells me is that based on this, the mathematical relationship of color, my complement color would be this blue. Well, I live in Ohio, and blue and yellow together make Michigan colors, and that just won't fly. So I've opted for kind of a purple color. Now, because I've got a brown background, I didn't want it to be more towards that blue tone. So I actually took my purple and put it a little bit more towards the red, which is a bit more of a kind of a difference, but I wanted it to be a little bit more muted in contrast to the yellow. So Paluton is one of the tools I have. The other tool that I've just recently purchased is this designer's toolkit, 1,000 colors, and it just gives you all these different illustrations. You can see backgrounds, foregrounds, and then all kind of the different colors, and it actually gives you the codes. I will put one caveat out there with this book, that the colors on the print do look pretty different than the colors on the screen. So that's kind of another thought about color. One of the other things I do is I follow a lot of researchers. So Michael Correll has some information on color, and you can find him at correll.io. And we'll include that link as well when we send out. But he's got kind of some research, as does Robert Cosera. So I really like Tableau in that they share a lot of research about color and design. One of the other things I do follow is neurobiologists who talk about color, and so we can kind of see why there is a conflict between red and green. So you've got where our biggest obstacles with color, you see from a wavelength standpoint, small cones are over here, and then medium and large, which is where the differences in green and red occur, are actually not that different in wavelength. So that's kind of some more interesting color theory. I will probably continue blogging on this in greater detail. So that's kind of some quick ideas about color. Moving on, probably one of the next questions I get is how do I design a dashboard? I typically stick with floating, and when I do a dashboard, one of the things I'm focused on is trying to understand my data very quickly at a glance. And so I really try to keep things very minimal. And so some of what I do is kind of look at the data, understand it, and just very quickly breeze through. So I don't typically spend a ton of time on the charts themselves until later. And so part of what I'm trying to do is just understand what patterns are happening, what's going on with the data. I'm actually going to keep that this way for now, and then I do a lot of duplication and moving stuff around. What does it look like if I do this? What does it look like if I do that? So this is kind of an example of where I'll kind of go through, really search through my data, not necessarily with a design in mind, more just trying to understand what can I get out of this? What is this telling me? And typically I'll do kind of stuff like this. And so this right here doesn't look like much, but I'm going to go ahead and just start a dashboard and see if I have something interesting. Now I'm going to hit the floating button. And then what I'm going to do is just start throwing things out there and seeing if anything goes together, if it's interesting, and does it tell me a story? And so, for example, what I've done is I've kind of just thrown this out here. It's not very exciting right now, but I can see where if this were interactive, if this worked together in some way, there's a good amount of harmony and balance that I seek. I can kind of get a view for what's going on, even though that this is static right now. Now, one thing I'm going to do is I don't really like how this looks. So I am going to start doing a little bit of formatting. So one thing I'll do is I'll take these bars down pretty significantly with size on the marks card. The marks card is kind of where everything happens. And so I'll do that, and then what I'll do is I'll also go ahead and just dual access. So I'll hit down my control key, I'll drag out sales again, and then I'm going to make this dual access, synchronize it so that they're together, and then I'm going to come down to the second one that I just made. Instead of letting it be a bar chart, I'm going to change it to circle, and I'm going to re-up the size on that, except for I've got that backwards. So this is where handy undo. I'll come down here to the one that's circle, and then I'll go ahead and expand that. Now I've got a lollipop chart. So that looks a little bit nicer when I go back to the dashboard. That looks a hair cleaner. And again, because I'm floating, I'll probably move stuff around and just make sure that it looks nice and tidy. Now, because I'm doing this as a lollipop chart, I probably don't need all this information. So I'm going to go ahead, put my sales right here in the mark labels, so that way they're there. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag over a distribution band and drop it over here on the table. And what this allows me to do is I'm going to fix this, and I've got a rough idea of what I want this to look like, to the maximum of those circles. And what this does is it moves stuff over so that way I know my labels won't overlap. That's the whole point of this, is I don't want my labels to overlap. So I'm turning off recalculation, I'm turning off labels, I'm turning off fill. All I want that to do is act as a spacer. So it exists over here. When I go to my dashboard and I start taking things out, my labels will start to move where I want them. And I'm also going to make sure that it's not set at minimum, but at maximum. This is the, you do demos and gonna have just little hiccups. So I'll go ahead and just change that to maximum. And now you can see my labels and everything fit. I don't need my headers. I'm gonna just start getting rid of anything extraneous. I really want to keep this as simple as possible, so I'm going to start moving things over. I've got these little cute labels. I do my best to get rid of them. And then the other thing I'll do is I'm going to just start stripping everything out. So anybody who follows Tuft knows, get rid of a lot of the data ink. This ink is not providing me value. A lot of my values are fairly close together, so I am depending a bit on the label. And so I'm going to just go through. One of the other things to know is that when Tableau does formatting, your sheet kind of sets off things globally, and then your rows and columns act as exceptions. So I have no grid lines on my sheet, but if I go down to my columns, that's where those grid lines are living. And so I can get rid of those. I can get rid of my zero lines. And now I have a very simple, very clean chart. So I've gone from a bar chart with a lot of clutter down to a lollipop with minimal clutter with dual axis. Now, the benefit of Tableau is I can duplicate this and then drag over region. And then that way, I don't have to spend time formatting this. The other thing about Tableau is that charts are very disposable. And so if I don't have a chart that looks the way I want, I can very easily get rid of it, reduplicate it with the formatting I want, and then I don't have to repeat that entire cycle. So now I've got the two charts. They're a lot more stripped down. I'm going to come to my line chart and tidy this up a bit. And since I'm doing floating, I can line this up on however I like. And so what I try to do is keep things in a nice line, not based on the container, but based on the data ink itself. So I'm really just trying to line things up, keep it nice and tidy. One of the things is that line is competing pretty heavily with my data. So I'm actually going to strip it back. The other thing I'm going to do while I'm here, I'm just going to take this down to kind of a lighter gray. I've got this map here where I'm using color coding, and I'm going to go ahead and just do that with the other items as well, where I just take the color, make them a little bit more standard, and so that way I know that all these items are sales. I'm reinforcing that visually. And same thing here, going to that same color, stripping it back, pushing it back, so I'm looking at the shape of these items, focusing a little less on the color, and then that way I can give my full attention to this map. This map today is going to be very important to me. The other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to get rid of the title, and I'm going to drastically get rid of ink here. So map layers, and I'm going to take absolutely everything out. People are often very worried to do this because we may not all know our states. I know I've gotten, unfortunately, very lazy and forgotten a number of my states. And so it's very handy to have the tooltip so you can kind of go, okay, it's this state, it's that state. And then I'm going to resize my map, and I'm actually going to take my map outside of the boundaries of Tableau. So you can see here's my canvas. This map over exceeds it a little bit. And then that way I've got this very nice large map. So if I want to do Viz and Tooltip, this is really getting the focus. And then I'm also going to go to the map itself on color. I'm not going to edit my colors because I really like this band and this range, but what I am going to do is go to Border, Automatic, and I'm going to make this white. You see a lot of D3 maps or maps in the newspaper that look like this. To me, it looks very clean and tidy. The other thing I'm going to go ahead and do, Format, and I'm just going to get rid of these boundaries and lines. I really want as few lines in this dashboard right now as possible. And so I need to make sure I'm in the sheet as well. And just get rid of these lines, really make it clean and tidy. And so now when I look at this, this is a little bit tidier and neat. The next piece that I'm going to do, because now I'm starting to think about this not just as pieces and parts, I want to start making this a dashboard. And to me, to make a dashboard, I'll need some interactivity. And so the best and easiest way I've found to kind of do this, I'm going to number by sheets. So I've got number 1, rename sheet number 2. This will make sense here in just 1 second. Rename this sheet to number 3. Normally I would take a little bit more time and I would number these and also put their names with them as well. But for this example and to focus on the actions I'm going to put in, I'm going to come up to Dashboard, Actions, and I'm going to add an action, the first action being a filter. And so now I've got these sheets and I know exactly which ones I'm filtering. They're nicely ordered. And so I want my first action to be the year on everything else. And I'll let that be on select. So that's kind of one. The other thing I do is I label these. So this becomes one to all. So that's the purpose of numbering the sheets, is that I can then have a shortcut on the dashboard action filter. Makes it very easy for me to trace, and it allows me flexibility to put in the varieties. Especially when you get into a lot of dashboard actions and things like that, this really becomes a lifesaver. And then the other thing I'm also going to do, I'm going to do a filter, and one of the things that I like to do a lot is hover filters, and not everybody likes them, but I find they're really interesting for if I want to filter on certain things, but I don't want that filter to stay. So sometimes we end up in this cycle where filters kind of become our enemy and they fight. And so this is one way of forcing that filter to be limited. So you only get this filter when you hover. One of the other things, so I'll kind of take a look and see how these filters are looking. Now, one thing that happens when I do this filter that I'm not sure I'm keen on is that the map filters. And so for me, that it creates a lot of unnecessary movement, and I'm not sure that I want it to do that. So what I'm actually going to do with this, go back into my actions, edit this, then take that map off and click OK. And then I'm going to add another action. And I want this action to be a highlight action. And again, I would say that this seems to be fairly underutilized. I especially like to do these hover actions or highlights on hover just to kind of pique interest as well as to help facilitate understanding. So I'm going to click on region, click OK. And because this is a highlight, it's going to want me to have that field in here. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead, drag region into details, so that way it's included. And now when I hover, this is flowing a little bit better. So I'll start working towards putting in different guides and titles. And what I can come here and do is start renaming things. So part of this is really keeping this very light and minimal. The other thing is I tend to do a lot of uppercase titles, and I do try to keep them smaller. Once I get kind of to a point, I'll start tidying these up and sizing these and making sure that they line up nicely. And then when I get towards the end, I'll start adding in other little features. So a lot of times I do add some extra data ink, more for navigation than anything else. So what I might do is put in a very small line by adding a text box, filling the background. and then just making sure that it's very thin. And so you can kind of just eyeball it. I may come up here and bring it down to even 1 pixel. And so as I click off this, I've now created a line that I can move around. And so if I want this line here as part of the title, that calls it out. And then I can go through here, and I can do the same thing to add a title to the dashboard. And with this, I'll kind of do the same thing. Typically, I'll stay in the same font family, but with this, what I might do is make this large but very light. So the bigger I make things, the lighter I tend to go. That's definitely a stylistic choice. What I might do is say, okay, that might be a hair too light, and I'll move this up a smidge, center it, and then go into layout. Now, a lot of features have been moved into layout. So if you're looking for your format options or things like that, they've moved over here to layout. I know that's an area where I still kind of sit here and kind of go, where did that go? So that lives here. And so that way you can kind of add different features and highlights. The other nice part with padding is that we can start saying, okay, I want this to be kind of more inward, or I want to make sure that this is constrained to a certain location. So don't forget the padding that's there. Definitely still useful with a floating layout. So then once I get to this point, I'd probably spend a little bit more time tidying up and making this a bit more cohesive. Okay, Joshua?
All right, no, that's great. I could watch you design dashboards all day and pick up something each time you do it. Just out of curiosity, those years under annual sales, I noticed when you hovered over, you get an option to expand or collapse, and I know sometimes I struggle with that, not wanting the user to do that.
So there's a few ways I'd handle that. One is probably the lazy way, and that's usually the way that I favor, is I'll just drag over a text box. You can also do a blank. I've seen people even drag over containers. I mean, really anything that just prevents that click. It will still show up on occasion, so that's one way. The other way is I could calculate it out and just make that a hard fixed here. But if I want to just be quick about it, that text box or the blanks are very handy to control where people click.
Nice. Yeah, that's a great tip. I use that sometimes to prevent tooltips from showing or interactions that I don't want as well, but very cool. All right, so I'm going to come in here and maybe switch gears a little bit. Bridget had a lot on design, visualizations. Let's go to the first step, and that is getting data. At least that's the first step where most of us start. So I've shared a little bit before about unions in Tableau, but sometimes it's not quite as easy as I've made it out to be in the past. So let's say that I've got a data source here that this one is my originals. And I've got some individuals, their occupation, income, maybe some preferences that they might have. And I've got another data source. This one's the same type. It's also a CSV. This one is called prequels, same sort of thing. Name, occupation, income for these individuals. And I've got another data source, which is sequels. Unfortunately, it's not the same data source, and or the same data type. It is actually a SQL Server data source. And so the question comes, how can I get all of that data together? So in Tableau, if I were to connect to these files, I might start with those files first, and I look at the union. I've got the originals and the prequels, so I might just union those together, and that works really nicely. But then I realize I've got an issue here in that I don't have a SQL Server data source. I can add that, so SQL Server. And if I can ever remember the strange name of the SQL server, then I might be able to figure that out. So I sign into the SQL server and I find it, and I find that somewhere in here I do in fact have a sequels table. Which looks good. It's the same type of format, same column, same structure. So ideally, what I'd love to do is drag it in here and union it to my CSVs. Now, if I was working in Tableau Prep, no problem. I could do that. Tableau Prep has a lot more options when it comes to bringing data together from different sources. But here in Tableau, I might give up. I might think, wow, what options do I have? A join, that's not at all what I want. Well, it turns out I actually can use a join. I just can't join them together right away. What I need first is a bit of a helper. And so what I'll do is I'll just create just a little helper file. Here I'll just use Notepad and just give myself a join column and a single value of 1. And we'll save that. And come in here, we'll go to the same directory just to make it easier. And I'll just call this union helper. So I'm going to get a union, but I'm going to use a helper file, and we're going to use a join to get the union. So Tableau makes this easy with the cross-database joins. I can just add that text file, that union helper, and we'll start with that. So I've got one field, one row, and now I've got all kinds of options. So I've got my originals and my prequels. I can bring those in. In fact, I'm going to bring them in as a union. So I'll select and get my originals and my prequels. I might think about wildcard and just take everything that's a CSV, but here I know it's these two, so that should work well. Now it's going to tell me, hey, there's nothing that you can join on, at least nothing that Tableau can figure out immediately. So what I'll do instead is I'll use that join field that I created, and then on this side, none of these fields will work, but I can create a join calculation, and I'll just make it the same value as the value for join. And so really what this turns out to be is a cross join where every row on the left gets joined with every row on the right. Oh, what did I do wrong? Let's try this again. 1 and join here. You know what? Why doesn't it like it?
I think you've got to have the 1 as a string.
Well, okay, so we'll try that. Try that. Aha. No.
Nope.
Man, what Bridget said about demos is true. There has to be a hiccup somewhere. Alright, so we'll do this. Create a join calculation on this side and just give it a 1. And create a join calculation on this side and just give it a 1. And it still doesn't like it. Oh, it was going to be so nice. Well, yes. So ideally, if it was cooperating with me, what I would do is then I would join in the SQL server as well. It probably would complain about that today because that seems to be the way it's going. Well, we'll come back to that one at some other point. All right, so let's wow, it's not happy with me at all. Let's start over altogether. All right, so pretend like the last 5 minutes didn't happen. We'll move on and come to another. So tips and tricks. Tip there. Practice the demo even more before you show it. All right, but now for some tips that hopefully do work. Let's say that that you've created a beautiful dashboard like Bridget has, but your boss or your client or someone tells you, that's wonderful, I love that I can see it, but I need to be able to drill down to the detail level. I need to be able to see the individual orders, and then I'll have some other things that I'll want to do with that. And I'm not a fan always of going down to the detail level, but I do understand that that can be useful at times. So I have often created tables of data that look something like this. Here's a nice tip. Right-click, drag and drop a field, especially dates. You'll get all of the options for dates, your date parts and date values, as well as sometimes some aggregations for fields. Here, I'm just going to take the date as a discrete date. That's my date value, showing it discretely. So that I get a row for every date, and then we'll do the same thing with order ID, and I might want to know who placed the order, what product did they order, and then I may also want to know some things like how much did I sell it for, how much profit did I make, and here's a cool trick. Drag another measure into the same space on the view that you have an existing measure, and Tableau will automatically use the measure values and measure names fields and give you that measure values shelf. So now I've got profit and sales sharing the same space. Using that measure values shelf, I can reorder them if I want. And I can add other measures now very easily to that measure values shelf, so I can know how much I sold it for, how much I made, what the discount was, and ultimately then I may bring this in as part of a dashboard or a drill down report from a dashboard, and then my boss will look at it and say, that's wonderful. Can you sort that now by sales? Put the biggest sales on top. And I say, sure, except when I try it, I notice that just clicking on the sort only sorts the lowest level of that table. So the product name is getting a sort based on sales or based on profit or based on whatever measure I'm using, but it's not sorting the entire table, and that causes some confusion and some headaches sometimes. And so how do we get a nice option for sorting? Well, one way that I will use from time to time is to parameterize the sort. So I'll create a parameter, and I'll say which sort options do you want? I like to create them as an integer list, and the reason is that as I go through and give it values, what I'll do is I'll use the value in a calculation, but the display then can be whatever I want. So I can say sales descending or sales ascending. But then if someone wants a different display, no problem. I can come in here, change the display, but I won't have to change any of the calculations that I do. Someone may want to do the same thing with profit. And then someone may say, well, you know what, it would be nice to be able to sort these by date. Now, they are actually sorted by date automatically, just because that's the first one on the list, but they're going up. So I'm seeing my oldest ones first. I may want to have some options, oldest to newest, or vice versa. I might want to know newest to oldest. And we could continue this list with maybe customer name, product name, all kinds of things. But the nice thing to notice is that I've got a nice mixture here of numeric values, some date values. Let's just throw in customer name just to show a text value as well. So we could potentially sort it by customer name. Now, because I've given it all values and the display, the one thing that's going to be hard for me is to keep track of which one's which. So what I like to do is just use my Windows snipping tool, or you may have other tools that just allow you to grab a nice screenshot, and then I can pull that off to the side and have that as reference as I go along. But I'll say OK on that parameter. And now I'm going to create a calculation based on that parameter to give me the actual sort. So I'll call this sort, and then based on what the option is that's selected, I'm going to be able to figure out a nice value for sorting. So when it's 1, that is my sales descending. So what I can do is I'll just use the rank function. So rank is a table calculation. I'll say rank the sum of sales. I'll specify that it's descending. So that's my 1. Oops, let's give it one more parenthesis. And when it's 2, it's ascending. Oh, and it might be helpful to put in a then. Yeah, we didn't need that. That's why I was complaining. When it's 3, then it wasn't sales. Now it was profit. And I'll make that one descending. When it's 4, now it was date, and I wanted the oldest one first. So here, notice that sum of date doesn't work, but if I keep it in aggregation but change it to maybe min or something like that, now I should be just fine. Oh, I'm catching an extra parenthesis on each one of these. So min date, min order date. 5 is the reverse of that. It's going to be ascending. Wait, oldest is ascending, newest is descending. And finally, customer name, we can do the same thing. So the nice thing here is that I can just use rank for almost any field that I want to order by. So even rank of a customer name works just fine. And I'll make sure that that's when that's 6. So this is my nice sort field. I may need to test it out a little bit to make sure I really got everything working the way that I want. But the key here is that now I have a sort field, and if I place it correctly in the view, so I'll drop it here on rows, but I don't want it to be continuous. I don't want an axis with it. I want it to be discrete so that it creates a header. And then I don't want it to be at the end. I want it to be at the beginning so that it forces a sort order. So notice now I'm getting all of my sorting, 1, 2, 3, and so on. And if I look over here, I see my sales, and they're descending. And that is because my sort option is set to sales descending. If I set it to ascending, then it's going to be the reverse. 0 comes first, and sales build up. Same thing I should see with profit. There's profit descending. And notice that as I change the parameter, it's just changing the value of the sort. Customer name. Oh, yeah, I did it descending, so we're going to get Z's first. Well, if your name is Zachary, you'll be appreciative of that. If your name is Abel, maybe not so much. I could go in and change that or give you a couple of options for that. Same thing with dates. And so all of this seems to be working fine. There's the oldest dates first. There's the newest dates first. Future dates, look at that. I'm glad we sold things in the future already. At some point, someone will watch the recording of the webinar, and it won't be future. But that's yet to come. So that's what I might do with sort, and then I don't want anybody to see what I'm doing behind the scenes, so I'll just right-click the field, say do not show the header, and the sorting still works just fine. So if I put this on a dashboard, now I'll have an option for you. You can sort this however you want, and I might use that tip that Bridget shared, because I don't want you to come in here and start clicking on these sort options thinking that anything's going to happen. So I might float a blank or a text over the column headers there, just so you don't try something that you shouldn't and then get frustrated that it's not working the way that you thought it should. So that's some tips around sorting. Now, I definitely agree with Bridget when it comes to managing my data. I love to group by folder, and then as I create some of these types of calculations, so sorting calculations or other calculations that are just specific to a given view, and maybe just for the user interface around that view, what I like to do is to create a specific folder that's for that view, but I group them all with something like a UI dot and then the name of the view. So this will be my orders list, and I'll copy that, say OK, and give this sheet the same name. So now if I am working on this sheet, I can come in here and say which calculations were specific to this view, and I'll have my list. Other calculations where I might reuse them across multiple views, I'll organize that differently. But this allows me to keep things straight, because I may eventually have a lot of calculations that are just used for the user interface or just used for a specific view. Table calculations that only work with a certain view, that sort of thing. I may put those in a folder like this. So I do very much like doing things like that. All right, so I'm not going to be able to build out as beautiful a dashboard as Bridget, at least not on the fly, but I will build out something fairly quickly here. So maybe profit by state. I do like on the layers just washing it out and getting rid of all of the extra junk. So we'll do that to start with, and then maybe one other view that is my profit by category and subcategory. So I'll have a view like this that gives me that, and we'll call this our profit by category and subcategory. And I might at this point put that on a dashboard. So I've got my not orders by state, profit by state, and my profit by category and subcategory. But the key here is that I want to be able to use the map as a filter. So I want to be able to select a state and then filter this lower view. So if I select California or Texas, I would see it. But I don't want to see everything all at once. I want to limit the user to selecting a single state and only show this bottom view when a single state is selected. So there are a couple of things that I'm going to do to enable that and make sure that happens. I'm going to edit that action that I created automatically from the little toolbar here. Now I'm going to come to Dashboard, Actions, and edit that filter. So I'll edit the filter. I might give it a nice name. That's another tip I would pass along to just give things a nice name, especially if you use by menu, because that's what will show up on the menu. But even if you don't, even if it's just select or hover, it'll help you keep things straight. And and I want it to originate from profit by state. I want it to target the profit by category and subcategory, but I only want to run on single select. So I'll run on single select, and now when I clear that, I'll exclude everything. And that way, I say OK here, that way when you select California, you'll see it. When nothing is selected, you won't see anything, except you're going to see the title. And that's a little bit obnoxious to me sometimes, because I want the dashboard to be clean. I don't want to see that title when there's no view. The problem is that Tableau always shows the title. I mean, I could hide it, and that's one possibility, is just have it hidden, and hopefully the user understands what this is, but they probably won't, at least not at first, and it might be nice to give it a title. So how can I give it a title that only shows when I select a state, when the view is actually showing? Well, one option is to use ad hoc calculations. You could even use a regular calculation, but then put it in a folder that's related to this view. But I actually like to use ad hoc calculations because it is very specific to this view. Because what I'm going to do is just double click here on columns, and inside quotation marks, give it the title, profit by category and subcategory. And now notice I get that value as a header. I don't need to see the name of the field as a label, so I can right click that and hide it. I can now also format the header itself so that it maybe matches more of what I want in a title. Yeah, I don't want these to show up actually. So undo. Let's format this field very specifically, and we'll format it to show up. No, not there. Yeah, so I might have to work on that, or I could just come in here and say, you know what, let's hide these labels. You'll know that that's category and subcategory. And so now I've got a nice title that shows up. I might want to work a little bit on the formatting, but it'll show up as long as the view is showing. But as soon as the view is no longer showing, the title disappears. And so that's one way that I'll give it some dynamic titles that show or don't show, and that works fairly well. Well, as I look at the time, I realize that almost certainly we're going to have a round 3, because there are a lot more tips that we could share. But I do want to leave a little bit of time for answers or questions and answers. So let's take a look and see what questions we have. The first question is, will there be a recorded version? Yes. So we have recorded, and as soon as we get it ready to go, it will be posted on Technion's website. I'll bring that screen back up again. So the recording will be available there, technionusa.com/video. But additionally, I think we've got it together now that you should receive an email when that recording is ready. So yes. All right, Bridget, it looks like the next question is based on what you were doing. So what was the reference line for in relation to the dual axis?
Perfect. Yeah, and I'll go ahead and take the presenter, and I'll kind of show and explain that a little bit more. And give me 1 second. And so what that reference line or that reference band did is I was running into an issue that without it on the dashboard, my labels were starting to overlap, and I really, really don't like that. And so to not have it overlap, what I did is I put that reference line in at 170% because I knew I was going to have this be small. And so that's 175% of the maximum. So the maximum value being this lower one. And what that does is it just stretches the space and makes sure that those labels will always kind of have the padding that they need. Rather than try to fix the axes, because I know I'm going to set up filters, and as I filter this, I want to make sure that it always has that extra padding. So that's one way of just providing extra space and making sure that the labels don't overlap.
Yeah, very cool.
One of the other questions we've got is about floating and mobile design. I will say it's definitely a bit more challenging to do mobile design with floating. So this is an example of a dashboard I did. And so it is using Device Designer. And so as I flip through here, you can see the extra work that I did in moving things around. You do have to manually move it. It doesn't necessarily space together as well when you set things to mobile. So if I were to bring this dashboard back up and say, okay, I'm going to put Device Designer on this, I would have to do a lot of manual moving and that sort of thing. So that is, I would say, probably the one downside of potentially doing floating. It really definitely depends on your design style. But typically, if I know I'm going to do a mobile dashboard, I will keep it lighter on charts versus if I know it will never be turned into more of a mobile device, then I'll kind of be a little bit more heavy on the charts as well.
All right, very cool. So there is a another question here about can you do union of custom SQL statements? So that is a great question. Yes, it would be somewhat similar to what I was going to show, that you could do it that way, or if it's a custom SQL statement that's accessing the same database on the same server, you might even consider just creating the union as part of that SQL statement. That might even be more straightforward since you're already using custom SQL. But otherwise, yes, you could potentially do some other things as well. All right, what is the difference when you check the box for run on single select only? Oh yes, so that is a great question. I'll come back to presenting here. And let's see. All right. All right, so single select versus allowing other selects. When I set it to single select only, that means that I am forcing the user to select a single state. If they were to rectangle select multiple states, notice that that does not trigger the action. So selecting more than one state does not trigger the action. Selecting a single state does. Now, if I went back to the action itself and edit it, so I'll double click to edit here, and then I uncheck run on single select, now you can see the profit for category and subcategory for all of the selected states. So sometimes that's desirable, sometimes that's not. So you'll have to decide what you want to allow the user to do, whether you want to keep it at a single select, which is what I chose to do, or say, hey, I don't care, choose as many states as you want, and that would work as well. But it's nice to know that you have the option. All right. Also love the feedback that says amazing presentations. So thank you, and yay for round 3. So I can guarantee you that we'll have a round 3 at some point. There is a question here about if we have a running total, how do we rename the column name, and it says discrete. Oh, so that I'm not sure. I'm hoping I'm understanding the question, but let's say that you do have something like maybe category and subcategory and sales, but here I've got sales, and then let's add maybe let's just make it a running total. So quick table calculation, and we made that a running total. and maybe we've got profit next to it just so we can see. So if I understand the question correctly, Tableau gives it this really nice long name here, running sum of sales along table down. Now, in some ways, that's really nice because it tells me exactly what's happening, but in some ways, that's not desirable to show to the end user to give them such a long name. So the nice thing is that in this case, I can right-click and just say Edit Alias, and it allows me to edit the alias of that measure name, so that I could call this running sales or whatever name I wanted to give it. But that would allow me to simplify it and give it any kind of name that I want. Additionally, let's go back to the idea that maybe all I had was just one measure, and so it's not even giving me a name. Well, I could use that ad hoc calculation trick to double click and just type in a value, running sales, and hide the label, but I get a nice header for what my measure is. So various options there. Thanks for the comment that says great stuff. We love sharing it, so thank you. When we have two different data sources and we have to union at that same time, we can append. Yes. So yes, you can, assuming you don't have the issues that I had. I think that was just a fluke kind of thing because I've done that many times before. David would like to see more on dashboards. So absolutely. We love getting feedback on what you guys want to see more of, so keep that coming. Will I publish the join once I get it working? Yeah, I think that's a great point. I will make sure to get that out there in working form. Kathy asks about a forum post about no data available placeholder, and then showing a chart otherwise. Is a floating container the only way to accomplish that? So if I have one view and I want it to show me a chart, if there's no data for that other view, that's the only option I'm aware of. And Bridget, maybe you know others, but the only way I know to do that is to have a floating container that collapses when the first view doesn't have any data, and underneath it is another chart that shows something, maybe a no data message or maybe something else.
I think something like that. I mean, it's possible, I think, to do a tiled version where one's open, one's shut. I probably wouldn't be the best person because I tend to favor floating.
Yeah, floating would be my go-to option on that kind of thing. In that forum post, if I remember correctly, Joe Mako, the original Zen master, he had an option that used some blending and some calculations, and it worked in some circumstances. It was a very, very clever option, but it may not always work, and it definitely took some setup to get there. So definitely check that out. It may be helpful at times. So thank you again. I'm seeing more messages here about people who've been using Tableau, but learned a lot, and I know I learn a lot whenever I watch someone else use Tableau as well. And is there a way to overlap the profit by state map and the correlating detail that appears so that the bottom half of the dashboard is not empty? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I threw that one together very quickly, but we could potentially think about floating one or the other, maybe move the map over here a little bit, and adjust a little bit as needed. So again, here is where having this inside a horizontal or vertical layout container, which could also be floating, is going to allow that container to collapse. So now if I oh, here's a cool tip that I learned from Tim Messer. I watched him doing a video, and he said, hey, how do you select the layout container that something's in? I used to always use the drop-down arrow, come down here, select layout container, and I could get to it. And then I watched him do it, and he said, no, if you have this selected, just double-click on the border or grip, and there's your container. Man, that has saved me so much time. But now notice that that inside that layout container, when the view disappears, the layout container collapses. Well, actually, what's inside the container collapses. The container's still there. But here is where, as Kathy mentioned, you could have something underneath it that says, "Hey, there's no data showing right now." So there's my no data. I'll bring the container to the top. The container's transparent, so you'll see it until I select something. When it goes away, you'll see no data. So that's that option there. But yeah, we could definitely overlap as much as we wanted. All right, nice comments. Can we union more than 3 tables? Yes. Yes, you can. So you can union more than 3 tables. If it's the same data source type, you can actually use the built-in union feature for text files, for SQL Server. Works really well. What is the title of the first webinar so I can go back and watch it? The first webinar ever? I don't know. Bridget? I don't know if you remember either, but I don't.
So our first tips and tricks is, I think, just tips and tricks, and it's out on YouTube, and I think it's also on our website. So we do have a YouTube channel with a lot of the legacy videos, and I think it might be there. I'm not sure if it's available on the primary website. So it's definitely a good item for us to follow up on.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm glad you remembered. I didn't right off. Can we use union JSON files? I'll admit that I've never tried that, but I think you could. Don't see any reason why you couldn't. At least using the technique of a helper file, I'm almost certain you could. Yeah, and then more requests to get back to showing that union trick. I'll show it. I promise it works. It just didn't work today. And I'm looking through the rest of the questions. If we've missed anything, definitely let me know. Oh, here's one. Is there any way to append to an existing data source? Yes. So there are some options there. One way is that if you're using extracts, so if I were to extract the data, I could extract it once. I get my extract, and then if I have another data source or something I want to append to it, I have the option to come down to extract and append either data from a file. Yeah, in fact, it would be a file in this case. So that's one option. Other options might be unioning things together. So if you have new data sources, new files, new tables that come in, you could create the union. With Tableau Prep, you'll have a lot more options for appending, and so I would definitely check that out as well. Or how about overwrite with year-to-date data? Yeah, that's where maybe if you just want to overwrite, you would just extract it again and set up a filter on the extract to keep it year-to-date. And a suggestion for a webinar of drilling down from dashboards or worksheets to dashboards and worksheets. I agree. That's one thing I struggle with is drill down and getting that to work consistently. So that would be a great topic. And if there are, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that would be a good exercise with maybe the deconstructing dashboards. So, I mean, I think we've got some good options there.
Yeah, definitely. And definitely, if anyone out there has any topics or suggestions, things that we could do better, things that you would be interested in seeing, things that you wouldn't be interested in seeing, let us know, because we do this to serve you and to just connect with the community. So we want to make sure that we're doing a good job with that. We love positive feedback, but honestly, if you have any kind of feedback that would help us improve or do a better job for you, we'd love to hear it. So let us know. Bridget, anything final from you?
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll talk to you next time.